There's a pretty common saying that reality is often stranger than fiction. This is completely true. Fiction at least has to make sense, or else people would call it absurd. Real life, however, has no such restrictions. Couple this with the 100-ish billion humans who have existed, and the tendency for said humans to find themselves in strange, funny, or just plain stupid situations, and you have the perfect recipe for some extremely dumb shit that is simply too stupid to make up. In this video, I will go over 3 such events, but I assure you there are a whole lot more. Jump back to the 1904 Summer Olympics in St. Louis, Missouri. This was the third Olympic Games held in modern times, so nobody really knew what they were doing yet, and it was nowhere near as sophisticated as it is now. The athletes present were overwhelmingly American and Canadian because this is 1904, mass transit hasn't been invented yet, and who the fuck wants to go to St. Louis? The events were pretty standard summer activities, but one that stands out is the marathon. It proved to be a clusterfuck of inhuman proportions. 32 athletes would compete in the event, however only 14 of them would actually finish. Most of the things that would go down during this event read like a bad comedy sketch. The cast of participants was rather colorful to begin with. A few of them were actual marathoners, but most weren't. Most of the Greeks who were present had never even run a marathon before. There were also 2 men of the Swana tribe of South Africa, being the first 2 black Africans to compete in the Olympics, arriving at the starting line with no shoes because they didn't have any. There was also a Cuban who raised money to come to the United States, immediately blew all of it on gambling, and then had to hitchhike to get to the event, to which he showed up late. The fun doesn't stop there, though. The conditions were awful. Much of the course was down dusty country roads, with the race officials running around in vehicles, which made the dust even worse, and there were only 2 water stops along the entire track. When it started, it was 32 degrees Celsius with high humidity. The course also ran through hills and small towns, requiring the participants to often dodge and weave through traffic. A mile in, and someone had already had a brush with death, the dust ripping his stomach lining and requiring hospitalization. Another began vomiting and dropped out. Soon after, one of the South Africans was chased off course by a pack of wild dogs, resulting in him finishing rather late. Meanwhile, our Cuban friend, having not eaten in almost 2 days by this point, stopped by an orchard to snack on some apples, which happened to be rotten, causing stomach cramps and forcing him to lie down and take a nap. He would still finish 4th. An American named Fred Lors also got cramps and decided to drop out and hitch a ride on a passing car. However, the car broke down near the end of the course, so he got out and re-entered the race, running the rest of the course and crossing the finish line. He was briefly crowned the winner, but was of course disqualified. The actual first place would go to Thomas Hicks, also American. He almost collapsed 7 miles from the finish line, but was loaded up with performance-enhancing drugs to allow him to finish. He was hallucinating and barely able to walk by this point, getting carried over the finish line and then out of the stadium after doctors were able to stabilize him, considering he was basically a dead man walking at that point. As said before, only 14 contestants actually finish, not counting Lords. All the rest gave up or didn't even start, and I honestly can't even blame them. With conditions like those, honestly, fuck that noise. Lors had the right idea, and even though he got disqualified, credit where credit is due. This next one takes place in April of 1856 in Panama. Now, the Big Ditch didn't exist yet, but the place was still important as a transit hub for people wanting to quickly cross and get to places like California with relative speed. The United States knew this and had been fucking around in the Panama area to enforce this because Manifest Destiny gang. A large number of Americans had shown up to take a boat to California, however there was a big delay so they had to wait and kind of just milled around the immediate area. Things were going okay until a confrontation occurred between some Americans and a local fruit vendor. One of them took a piece of watermelon and refused to pay for it, which naturally caused the vendor to get a little pissed. Now, the American, being, American and all, overreacted a bit and pulled his gun on the vendor, who responded by pulling his own knife. Another person would attempt to wrestle the gun away from him, which resulted in a shot being fired. Oh shit. This started a massive brawl, with many of the native Panamanians jumping in and attacking the Americans, who in turn fought back. They would destroy several American businesses and the railway station, and a lot of people would die before things would eventually calm down. In all, 15 Americans were killed and another 50 would be wounded, while the Panamanians suffered 2 dead and 13 wounded. This understandably caused a bit of a diplomatic crisis, as both sides claimed the other was at fault. The American government, being American, decided to send in the army to keep the peace after the riot, but they only stayed a few days as things had mostly settled down by that point. All that for a fucking slice of watermelon. Humans are stupid. Our final story takes place in London in 1809, where a man named Theodore Hook is making bets with his friend Samuel Beasley. Now, betting between buds very rarely ends well for anyone within the immediate vicinity, and this is no exception. Being the harbinger of chaos that he was, Theo was willing to put money on his ability to make a random house in London the most well-known house in the city in a week. Samuel, being a reasonably intelligent person who understood how fucking hard that would be for a normal person to pull off, took the bet. However, Theo is not an ordinary person, and his commitment to memory was legendary. The house chosen would be 54 Berners Street, and he went all out. He would send out thousands of letters, orders, and requests to various people around the country, all in the name of the resident Miss Tottenham, setting everything to arrive on the same day. Then, he and Samuel set up shop on the other side of the street and waited to see the fireworks, and they did not need to wait long. At around 5 in the morning on November 27th, there was a knock on the door of the house. It was a chimney sweep who said he had been called to that address. The maid who answered the door assured him that it was a snake and sent him on his way. A few minutes later, another showed up with the same story. Then another, and another. All in all, 12 sweeps were sent away very confused with no work. However, the fun had just begun for Miss Tottenham, as next up was a veritable fleet of coal carts, all claiming to be delivering orders to that address. Following them closely were several cake makers with a large number of wedding cakes. After them, several doctors, surgeons, lawyers, apothecaries, and priests who had been called to administer to a person in the house who they had been told were dying. They were, of course, followed by a group of undertakers with coffins. The streets were starting to get a little crowded. Fish salesmen and shoemakers and a dozen pianos, along with many more people of various trades and occupations. It gets even crazier, with various individuals of high stature arriving, including the Governor of the Bank of England, the Lord Mayor of London, the Chairman of the East India Company, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. People would show up all day, resulting in a large part of London grinding to a halt, while police officers desperately tried to clear people out and maintain order. Theo had very clearly won his bet, and was probably pissing himself with laughter for the majority of the day. He had to go into hiding for a while in the countryside since a whole lot of people suddenly wanted his ass for some reason. Overall, as far as practical jokes go, I admire the sheer audacity it requires to pull off something like that. So what was the moral of these stories? Honestly, fuck if I know. People are funny and do funny and questionably intelligent things. That's about it. And as I said, there are hundreds of little stupid stories like these, and those are just the ones that were written down. Anyways, that's about it for this video, so I'll see you in the next one.